Welcome back to another episode of the Pastor's Chronicles. Before we get started, I would like to invite you to click the link below and join me on Facebook, the Pastor's Chronicles. Also, I would like for you to follow me on Instagram, where you have a lot of updates there. And also join me on my platform, the Pastor's Chronicles. And you can subscribe to that too. And also I want you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Click the bell so you can get updates and whatnot, so you won't. And I'm dropping right now Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so people, please come back. And I usually drop around 5:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Come through and check me out because people are not getting notifications. Upon that note, let's get started with the next part of this Chronicles. And we're going to start this Chronicle off like this.
It is a story everyone knows. After a rude refusal by a local innkeeper, Mary and Joseph bedded down in a barn in Bethlehem. The next day, Mary gave birth to a son, the Son of God. But centuries before Jesus walked the earth, early Europeans were celebrating light and birth in the darkest days of winter. In the Norse country, this winter celebration was known as Yule. Around December 21st, the winter solstice, fathers and sons would drag home the biggest log they could find and set it on fire. The Yule log warmed, but it also looked ahead. Each spark was said to represent a pig or calf to be born in the spring. Also dragged inside were evergreens, the one plant that could make it through a Norse winter. Evergreens proved that life persisted in this dark time.
There's a natural attraction to that which lives through the winter when one is struggling to survive through the winter. The evergreen is that part of nature that seems impervious to the coming of winter and the diminishing of the sun. And so it's an absolutely natural symbol, one which I think we react to almost without thinking about.
For as long as the Yule log burned, about 12 days, feasting and revelry reigned supreme. In fact, this was one of the few times that meat was abundant, since cattle had just been slaughtered for the long winter.
There is a necessity to kill most of the cattle, because you can't keep them alive over the winter when there's nothing to feed them on. You keep a few alive for breeding. But there is an opportunity for a great blowout, for a great feast, time to party.
The party raged inside in defiance of winter's deadly howl.
There is a spooky feel about the northern Yuletide festivals. You may be all right there in the hall with the blazing fires, but outside there are demons, there are spirits.
In Germany, the pagan god Odin lent his name to this midwinter holiday. Early Germans were terrified of Odin, whose nocturnal flights decided who would prosper or perish in the coming year. Later, we'd see another Christmas skyrider, Santa Claus. But for now, staying inside became the smartest choice at this frightening time of the year. A 1,000 miles away in Rome, winter was less harrowing, but the December festivals were just as elaborate. 1 week before the winter solstice, Romans began celebrating Saturnalia, a month-long orgy of food and drink. Named for the god Saturn, which meant plenty, Rome's established order was turned on its head during this wild, delirious time.
The Saturnalia celebrations were certainly times of revelry, of turning the social order upside down, of having the master pretend to be the slave and the slave pretend to be the master, sort of a time out of time in which one could celebrate a kind of disorder in the universe.
One of the holiday's important feasts was Juvenalia, which celebrated the children of Rome.
Although these early festivals are not necessarily about children particularly, though they are about fertility, children did have their particular place. The indulgence of children, of course, is very much a part of our modern Christmas, but it did have its place even in these ribald, drunken festivals that the Romans had.
Among the upper classes in Rome, solstice celebrations were significantly more sober. Many influential Romans worshipped Mithra, the god of the unconquerable sun. To this small but powerful sect, the birthday of Mithra was the holiest day of the year.
December 25th was the winter solstice in that part of the world, and it was also understood to be the birthday of the sun god, Mithra. And Mithra was said to be born from a rock. Shepherds came to worship him as he was an infant god born out in that pastoral place in the fields. And many of those stories, of course, have come into Christian tradition.
While Romans were worshiping the sun god, a new religion was taking hold throughout the empire. At first, Christians didn't celebrate the birth of Christ. His resurrection was the essential fact of the new religion. By the 4th century, however, the question of the holy birth became impossible to ignore.
There were questions within the church about how to even imagine Jesus. Some people believed that Jesus was purely a spiritual emanation of God, and others believed that Jesus must have actually appeared on earth. And so the decision to celebrate Jesus' birth meant that Jesus was actually a human or a human form.
For Christians, the fact of his birth was settled, but the date remained a mystery. The Bible doesn't mention exactly when Christ was born, but certain facts suggest it probably was not in December.
So if you're going to sort through the runes of the scriptures, Jesus was probably born in the spring. If the shepherds are out in the fields watching their flock by night, we're not talking about one of the cold spells at the heart of winter.
If pagan Rome was already celebrating the birth of Mithra on December 25th, it seemed natural to honor the birth of the Christ child at the same time. By the 4th century, the church made it official. December 25th was declared the feast day of the Nativity.
But of course it's a very short step from the feast day of the risen sun, S-U-N, to the feast day of the risen sun, S-O-N. So in a sense, it's a very good choice, and the symbolism is there because the feast day of the unconquered sun was about fertility, about birth, and so obviously is the Christian Christmas.
The church knew it could not outlaw the pagan traditions of Christmas, so it set out to adopt them. The evergreens traditionally brought inside were soon decorated with apples, symbolizing the Garden of Eden. These apples would eventually become Christmas ornaments. And holly, a traditional midwinter decoration, was recast to represent Christ's crown of thorns.
People already had their own agenda for this season, and that agenda was not one that was really radically changed when the names got changed from non-Christian to Christian names. The church pretty much had a policy of live and let live. If people would call themselves Christians and do lip service to the birth of the Savior, then let them do anything that they wanted to do with it. But on the other hand, by assigning the nativity to that time of year, the church really gave up the opportunity to control the way that celebration took place.
The tension between piety and revelry at Christmas would reach its logical and extreme conclusion in Puritan England, when the holiday would be considered so un-Christian it was done away with altogether. By the Middle Ages, Christianity had largely replaced the old pagan religions of Europe. On December 25th, the faithful were called to Gothic cathedrals like Notre Dame and Salisbury Cathedral in England for Christ's Mass, soon to be called Christmas. But out in the streets, the holiday was still more raucous than religious.
If you went to England around Christmas time, any time before, say, 1800, you'd probably feel pretty ill at ease. You wouldn't think it was Christmas at all. What would you think it was? Maybe Mardi Gras, maybe New Year's Eve, maybe Halloween? Because Christmas in old-time England was really a carnival.
The houses of London were littered with brawling, drunken villagers and couples engaged in the most unholy activities. And each Christmas, a beggar or student was temporarily put in charge after being crowned the Lord of Misrule. The rest of the peasantry also got their once-a-year chance to grab power from the ruling classes.
They would go around to the houses of the rich, they would bang on the doors and demand entry, and once they were let in, the lord of the manor had to give them the best stuff that he had. He had to give them his best food, he had to give them his best beer, his best of everything.
And a jolly wassail, it's then you shall hear.
But if he didn't, they would threaten or actually perform a trick.
Come butler, come fill us.
One surviving Christmas song says, if you don't give us what we want, then down will come butler, bowl and all.
But if you do draw us a bowl of the small, then down shall go butler, bowl and all, bowl and all.
Some historians think that it performed the role of a safety valve. You might say that a wealthy man could make up for an entire year of small or large injustices to the poor by giving a generous Christmas handout just once in the year.
The rules of Christmas would soon change, however, as a wave of religious reform swept through England in the early 17th century. Led by Oliver Cromwell, the Puritans overthrew the king's forces in 1645 and vowed to rid England of all that was decadent. High on their list was English Christmas, and in 1652 they outlawed it altogether. Shops were ordered to stay open, churches were forced to stay closed.
The Puritans were always, I think, deeply attracted to those things that they were most opposed to. They had a fear that they might have too good of a time. I don't mean to trivialize them, but there was a deep fear that if these things were legalized, they themselves might enjoy them and their souls would be lost.
The Puritans may have said good riddance to Christmas, but the people never really stopped celebrating it. The holiday merely went underground. If Christmas pie was illegal, it began to be known as mince pie instead, which was just as delicious.
The deeper need for Christmas in the human heart, the need for celebration at a time of darkness, those needs made the battle against Christmas, gave it a few temporary wins, but it couldn't possibly secure a final victory.
In 1656, the men of Kent and Canterbury passed a resolution saying that if they could not have their Christmas day, they would have the king back on his throne. They soon got their wish. The monarchy was restored with Charles II, and Christmas was restored with him. It seemed the English could live without a king, but not without Christmas.
It has been argued that one reason for the restoration of the monarchy is because by restoring the monarchy you also restored Christmas, or you restored the proper English Christmas with its rituals, its traditions and its carousing. Christmas is brought back, if you like, by popular acclaim.
The fight against Christmas may have been lost in England, but the Puritans had high hopes for the new colonies in America. In 1620, a small group of separatists came ashore at Plymouth, Massachusetts. Even more orthodox than their English cousins, these men and women hoped to rid themselves once and for all of the Christmas scourge. In 1659, Puritans in Boston followed their English brethren in outlawing Christmas. Anyone caught exhibiting the Christmas spirit was fined 5 shillings. Like in England, however, Christmas remained impossible to contain. The 1719 Boston Almanac doesn't list a Christmas holiday, but it does recommend that in late December you not let your children and servants run too much abroad at night.
From almost the beginning in Massachusetts, there's evidence that some people practiced Christmas, and that when they did so, it was in fact an opportunity to get drunk. And one of the most interesting little sidelights on this is the finding of historical demographers that there was actually a bulge in conceptions, the conception of children, that took place during Christmas.
Not all the colonies had such trouble with Christmas. Captain John Smith, leader of the Jamestown settlement in Virginia, wrote that their first New World Christmas was kept with plenty of good oysters, wild fowl, and good bread. Jamestown settlers were also the first to drink eggnog as a Christmas drink, the nog coming from the word grog, which means any drink made with rum. After independence, however, all things English fell out of favor in America, Christmas included. In fact, on December 25, 1789, the United States Congress sat in session and continued to stay open on Christmas Day for most of the next 67 years.
At this same time, there are people who are writing in their diaries that, isn't it too bad we don't have any holidays? So after the Revolution, here is an entire nation that works hard, has forsaken many holidays, has given up many holidays because they were holidays that were mandated by the Crown. And it is time to start thinking about how to populate the calendar.
As the 19th century dawned, Christmas would be one holiday that would pull the new nation together. But it wouldn't be the carnival Christmas of Old England, nor would it be particularly religious. America would invent its very own Christmas, and in the process, reinvent it for the whole world. New York City, 1820. Within the space of a generation, New York had gone from a backwater port town to the center of American commerce. Great wealth came to a few during these years and moderate livings to the burgeoning middle class. But the Industrial Revolution had also created a class of the unemployed and unconnected, whose very existence threatened the cozy world of New York's middle rung. This was never more clear than at Christmas time.
Class conflict was emerging with the earliest stages of industrial capitalism. And so what had previously just had an edge of menace, a little bit of trick, but much more goodwill, much more treat, now changed, and the menace became increasingly obvious and increasingly serious. So that by the 1820s, the Christmas season in cities like New York was really a time of gang rioting, a really very, very nasty scene. So nasty, in fact, that in the year 1828, the New York City Council for the first time instituted a professional police force for the city as a direct result of a particularly savage Christmas season riot the year before.
New York's upper class was worried. So worried that a few of them set out to change the way the holiday was celebrated. Washington Irving was America's best-selling novelist, and in 1819 he used his expertise to write Bracebridge Hall, an enormously popular series of stories about Christmas at an imaginary English manor house. Here, the classes mingled effortlessly as squires welcomed friendly and grateful peasants into their homes. And in 1843, England's most popular writer, Charles Dickens, Illustrated News published this engraving of the royal family standing by the first Christmas tree most English had ever seen. In just a few years, a decorated fir could be found in nearly every English home at Christmas.
Within a few years, if you look at Victorian diaries or letters, people are saying, we had a Christmas tree as is customary, or we had a Christmas tree as we have always had. And of course, they hadn't always had one at all. It is a custom which had started in the 1840s, and by the late 1850s, people believed that the Christmas tree was part of the English Christmas.
Americans embraced the Christmas tree just as quickly as the English had. In fact, its connection to the Old World was one of its strongest selling points.
For a lot of Americans, these are going to be new holiday traditions, not something their parents observed, especially in the case of the more austere Protestants. So they're looking for a reason for what they're doing. And one of the most convenient reasons they can have is they can say, well, this is the way it's done in Germany, or this is the way it's done in England.
All of a sudden, Christmas traditions were popping up everywhere. In 1828, Joel R. Poinsett, America's minister to Mexico, brought back a green and red plant that seemed perfect for the new holiday. And in 1843, the English firm of J.C. Horsley printed the first Christmas card. A newly efficient postal service in England and America helped make Christmas cards an overnight sensation. It seemed as though every vestige of the old Bacchanalian Christmas was gone, but even the Victorians couldn't clean up Christmas completely.
Victorians were particularly keen on mistletoe because, of course, you could actually kiss a lady, or a lady could kiss a man, that normally, in the normal course of events, she would not be allowed to kiss. So in a society which was fairly strict One vestige of that licentious Christmas from earlier times is the sprig of mistletoe. No Victorian Christmas gathering was without it.
By mid-century, Christmas was everywhere in America, in the streets, in the homes, in the marketplace. The one place you could not find Christmas was in church. Most Americans were Protestant, and the Protestant church had ignored Christmas for years. But Protestant Victorians longed for official religion on this sacred day.
What a number of them do initially is say, well, if we can't find a Christmas service in our Baptist church or our Presbyterian church, let's go see what the Catholics are doing, or let's go see what the Episcopalians are doing. And increasingly that puts pressure on these latter-day Puritans to have Christmas services, because there's a way in which lay people begin to expect it.
Church services, mistletoe, and Christmas trees. America's new holiday now seemed firmly in place. But Victorian America had one last contribution to the Christmas season. A jolly elf who shimmied down the chimney would soon personify Christmas for generations to come.
Here comes Santa Claus, right down Santa Claus Lane.
We borrowed the Christmas tree from Germany and the Christmas card from England. But one Christmas icon was developed right here in America, Santa Claus.
Hang your stocking, say your prayers, 'cause Santa Claus comes tonight.
Long before Santa, however, there was St. Nicholas, a Greek Orthodox bishop who became one of the most popular saints of the Middle Ages. On December 6th, St. Nicholas Day, good children woke to gifts from the kindly saint. Bad children sulked away with nothing. In Holland, he was known as Sinterklaas, and when the Dutch came to this country, they brought tales of their gift-giving Nicholas with them. This quaint custom caught the imagination of Clement Clark Moore, a well-heeled Episcopal minister in New York City. In 1822, Moore wrote a poem for his children about a good-natured saint who came down the chimney on Christmas Eve.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there.
Moore dreamed up Dasher, Dancer, and the rest of the reindeer, along with Santa's entrance through the chimney. But at first he was embarrassed by the poem. He worried it was too frivolous for a man of the church.
Clement Moore was a minister. Here a minister, who should be on the other side, is promoting a secular Christmas with reindeer and all the rest of it. But there was no mention in the poem of anything religious. And in fact, that's why he didn't reveal who he was. In the beginning, he didn't reveal the authorship.
Moore soon owned up to the poem when it became clear that every child in America was scanning the horizon for reindeer on Christmas Eve. Less clear was what exactly this Santa Claus looked like. At first, Santa came in all shapes and sizes. A pagan sorcerer, a frightening gnome, even a drunkard on a turkey-driven sleigh. Then, in 1863, Thomas Nast, a cartoonist for Harper's Weekly, settled the matter once and for all with his version of the Christmas saint. Nast Santa was rounder and jollier than his austere Catholic cousin. He looked, in fact, like a man of his times, a man who would fit right in with the rotund, bewhiskered robber barons of the late 19th century. But Santa was a robber baron in reverse.
Instead of taking from the less fortunate, he gave to the less fortunate. He gave to people regardless of whether they'd done something or not. In other words, he gave to children. Instead of gathering together wealth, he gets rid of wealth, and he does it yearly.
A captain of industry with a heart of gold. It's no wonder that by the 1840s, Santa Claus was an irresistible image to America's retailers. Here was a guy who could sell anything at Christmas, but make it seem like you were not buying gifts at all.
Santa Claus provided a way for both children and parents to pretend that Christmas presents were not in the realm of the commercial marketplace, that Christmas presents existed in the realm of pure domestic affection. So Santa Claus played a very important role for both parents and children. He took presents out of the realm of commerce.
If the image of Santa could sell merchandise, retailers soon figured that a real-life Santa would boost sales even further. Santa has been showing up in department stores since the mid-1800s. And since then, nothing has loomed larger to a child at Christmas than this annual pilgrimage.
You want to talk to Santa Claus, where do you go? You go to the shopping mall. Now, this is strange for a saint to be living pretty much full-time in a department store. It doesn't bother Americans because we are, after all, a capitalistic society. It makes perfect sense for us to have our national saint in a department store. That's commercial sense for us, dollars and cents.
Author and humorist Gene Shepard immortalized this rite of passage in A Christmas Story, an autobiographical account of one boy's Christmas.
You know, I've been thinking for weeks what I wanted for Christmas. I figured the best thing to do is to tell Santa Claus about that. And I looked up at that Santa Claus, and he had these big, watery blue eyes and a huge beard and all, and he's looking at me right in the eye. And he was so impressive that my mind went blank.
Ho, 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 and what's your name, little boy?
It's like if all of a sudden you're sitting on the president's lap, and he says, "What would you like me to pass in legislation, Sonny?" I mean, your mind's going to go blank. You can't remember any of this stuff. And so at that point, Santa Claus looked at me and he says, "All right, how about a football, kid?"
How about a nice football?
A football? I wanted a BB gun. So he pushed me off his lap, and this elf grabbed me and threw me down a slide that went down into the snow. And I laid there for a minute, and I knew that I was not a fit person to talk to the great. Santa Claus was obviously a star.
A celebrity of this magnitude obviously needed a sidekick. In 1939, Robert May, a copywriter at the Montgomery Ward department store, dashed off a promotional children's book to lure Christmas shoppers into the store. May's story told of an ostracized reindeer with a big red nose.
Poor Rudolph. Where most reindeers' noses are brownish and tiny, Rudolph's was red, very large and quite shiny.
This physical, shall I say, disability turns out to be an asset because it's a foggy Christmas Eve.
This fog will be hard to get through.
And this light on the nose enables poor old stumbling Santa Claus to get through.
Then how the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee, "Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history."
So you have this handicapped sort of child figure helping the benighted parental figure make Christmas possible.
Rudolph brought Christmas full circle. It was now the children who really made Christmas possible. Only they understood the meaning of this enchanted day. From Washington Irving to Montgomery Ward, a battle for Christmas had been fought and won by kids. By the 1920s, few vestiges of the carnival Christmas were left in America. One exception was this Christmas parade in New York City, where a glimpse of Santa Claus was worth the all-day wait. But But by the 1950s, Christmas was strictly a family affair, with eggnog by the fire, Bing on the hi-fi, and a load of presents under the tree.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose, tiny tots with their eyes all aglow will find it hard to sleep tonight.
The joy of opening up gifts is one of the things that makes Christmas what it is.
He's loaded lots of toys and goodies.
It's the mystery of all these packages. And I think that's why we wrap them. It's exciting to have a package lying there with silver paper on it. You don't know what's in it. And you open it up, and there it is. It's something that's really great, that you really wanted.
But to give presents, you have to shop for them. And shopping has long been at the heart of the Christmas season. Critics say this yearly buying frenzy obscures the real reason for Christmas, to celebrate the birth of the Christ child.
Celebrate the birth of Christ and the gift that God gave us, as much as the gifts we give our children on Christmas Day. But she wants all the toys, right?
I think a lot of it is more commercialized than when I was younger. I remember going to church and having family dinners being more of an important aspect of it. It's difficult because the children don't grow up realizing what the real meaning is.
People say that Christ has been lost in Christmas. Implicit in that is the idea that Christ had ever been totally the center of Christmas. And as Christmas has been celebrated ever since it was instituted as a feast of the Nativity, there's always been other ritual, other ceremony, other activity associated with Christmas, in addition to Christ.
Everyone knows the most famous icon of the holiday season is Santa Claus, flying through the sky on a sleigh pulled by 8 reindeer, delivering gifts to children all over the Western world. And most heathens understand that modern-day Christmas traditions, including Santa Claus, comes from our ancient Northern European holiday known to the Germanic peoples as Yule. The most widely popular theory today is that Santa Claus is a manifestation of the god Odin, who they say leads the wild hunt each year at midwinter. But I'm not entirely sure that this theory holds as much weight as it appears. It definitely seems to be a more modern Wicca Asatru idea based on medieval attestations that has become popular among neo-pagan circles. So let's take a closer look at just who exactly is the Yule Father of ancient winters past. Is he one deity in particular, or an amalgamation of multiple different gods, or maybe just an animistic nature spirit embodying the winter itself? 'Twas the Night Before Christmas by Clement Clarke Moore depicts Santa Claus with 8 reindeer. Many connect this to Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. But as far as I know, Sleipnir doesn't have a name for each of his legs, does he? But 2 of Santa's reindeer are named Dunder and Blixen, or more famously, Donner and Blitzen, the Dutch and German words for thunder and lightning. 2 forces personified by the god Thunor, who rides across the sky in a thundering chariot pulled by his 2 goats. Thor is one of the most beloved gods in the pantheon, since he is the friend of the common man. Relics depicting Thor and Mjolnir have been among the most common archaeological findings in Northern Europe. He's also attested by ancient sources as being the most popular god among the Alemanni, Suebi, and Marcomanni tribes, as well as the Franconians and Thuringians. Adam of Bremen even writes that Thor was placed in the central throne at the Temple of Uppsala. with Freyr and Odin on either side of him. Today in Germany, there is the tradition of Krampus, the Yule Goat. Modern legends describe him as a terrifying or malevolent satanic-like creature, opposite of St. Nicholas, that bags up the naughty children to be devoured in his lair. This is clearly a Christian demonization of an ancient pagan tradition with Donner's goats. Even during the time of the Brothers Grimm, Krampus was not a horrifying demonic creature as they show him today. The Yule Goat was the home visitor and the gift bringer. Traditionally, men dressed up as goats and went throughout town singing and performing, probably much like caroling and wassailing in England. In Scandinavia, the Yule Book is one of the most iconic symbols of Yuletide. There are several 19th and early 20th century folk songs about the gift-bringing Yule Goat in Sweden. The English Father Christmas, who is really Father Yule, also rides on a goat as well, and is depicted with a bowl of steaming wassail. A well-known holiday tradition in England is burning a Yule log. The wood most likely used was oak, a tree closely associated with Donner. There's also an interesting connection that I noticed with the Old Norse name Mjolnir, which means Yule figure, and Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. The actual word is within the word Mjolnir, and I wonder if there is some kind of ancient connection here that would link Thor with being the Yule Father. I haven't been able to find anything on this other than just that the spelling is similar, but it's definitely an interesting theory to explore. The imagery of Santa riding in a flying vehicle pulled by his animal familiars could very much be an ancient callback to Thor and his chariot. Another very popular deity that's associated with Yule is the fertility and nature god Yngvi Freyr. In Proto-Germanic, his name is Frollo, and he may have been seen as the Yule Father to the English, Saxons, Frisians, and Jutes. These were the tribes living around the North Sea who were known as the Ingavones, claiming Yng as their divine forefather. Yngvi is also credited as the patron of the ancient Swedes and Norwegians. Freyr is a god of harvest, abundance, fertility, and lordship. While there are tribes named after Yng, there are no Teutonic tribes or countries named after Odin. This leads me to believe that Freyr would have been a more likely Yule figure, given that several tribes claim descendants from him and that he is also a god of nature and harvest. One of the most common holiday colors after red and green is also gold, symbolic of the sun and light, but we also remember that Freyr has a golden boar named Goldenbursti, whose name literally means golden bristles or golden mane. The main dish of the Yuletide feast is a boar, a tradition that many people still observe today with serving a honey-baked ham at their family holiday gathering. There's actually a 15th century English carol called The Boar's Head.
Is the rarest dish in all the land, which thus be decked with a gay garland, and thus servire cantico.
This is rooted in our ancestral memory. Even during the Middle Ages in England, there were people who still understood the significance linking back to the ancient Germanic tradition of the sacrificial boar at Yuletide. This ham would have to be hunted since it's a boar, which would require a great hunting party complete with spears, arrows, and hunting dogs. This of course ties back into the Wild Hunt. In England, the traditional imagery of the Yule Father can be found in Charles Dickens' The Christmas Carol as the ghost of Christmas Present, a spirit depicted as a larger-than-life merry fellow who wears a wreath of holly, laurel, and mistletoe, and dressed in forest green robes. He's surrounded by a cornucopia of food and a steaming bowl of wassail, symbolizing fertility, feasting, and the abundant harvest. In Celtic mythology, similar imagery can be found among their winter figure of the Holly King. In the local folklore of England, the hunting and nature god Herne is known to lead the wild hunt through Whitsman Wood at midwinter. He's associated with deer, wolves, and the animals of the forest, and is equivalent with the Celtic god Cernunnos, as both are forest and hunting gods, depicted wearing antlers. Freyr is also known to fight with antlers in mythology, so it is possible that Herne could be an aspect of Freyr, as both are nature deities. This might also be why reindeer are another common winter holiday animal and associated with Santa Claus. Another huntsman deity associated with winter is Ullr. He is the god of archery, winter, hunting, and the northern lights. Bows were traditionally carved out of wood from yew trees, and Ullr's home is Idlair, which means yew dales. Yggdrasil was believed to have once been a yew tree before the rise of the Odin cult changed it to an ash. The yew tree is an evergreen tree, while the ash is not. Adam of Bremen writes also in his accounts that there was once a tree outside of the temple of Uppsala that remained evergreen throughout the summer and the winter. The tree is also a phallic symbol, important especially at this time of year in the middle of winter, representing eternal life and cyclical time. We know from historical sources that folk gathered around evergreen trees or sacred grove to make offerings of meat and blood sacrifices at Yule.
It seems more likely that there would be a Father Winter figure in the old times as well, and that might be related to a figure like Ullr, who is, god of cold weather and hunting and huntsmanship and the bow and that sort of thing, which is then again connected to the yew tree, which is a promise of spring, an evergreen tree, because we brought in firs and evergreen trees for thousands of years. Even the Romans brought in evergreens into their homes during their winter festivals. It seems much more likely that this is again attesting roles to Odin that he didn't really have. No, but I mean, even the big sack over the shoulder bringing home a gift in the dead of winter, that sounds like when you go out on a hunt and you bring back the animal on your back, or you bring back a quart of conies, or you bring back, the deer and that sort of thing. Because it does kind of look like a big sack. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on a hunt and brought back a deer for, processing, but, it is kind of like a big hunk of meat. And if you're hungry during winter time and you don't want to slaughter the animals that are living in your barn for meat, then it's a pretty nice big gift. And then we know that they hung up slaughtered animals, meat and carcasses from the branches of the Yule tree, in supposed respect to Odin and as a sacrifice to him. But it makes much more sense that you've slaughtered the wild animal and you've processed it and you've given part of it to hang in the Yule tree, that you would honor the huntsman instead. And again, also, I mean, the other thing too is we can't forget that during the Middle Ages, there were huge penalties for what was called poaching, which was, peasants going out into the forest and killing animals to bring home to eat and survive, to supplement their feudal grain-based diet, because the lords had, bought up and taken control of the forests and had put the foresters out of work by taking the land and using it as their private game reserves. Poaching was punishable by, chopping off your hand, hanging, burning, later on being shot, and up until like 1900, you could be, if you were in England, you could be put on a ship and sent to Australia, and in Russia, if you were a serf until the 1880s and you had poached, you would be sent to a gulag in Siberia. It would be remiss to forget that connotation. Let's take away the huntsman god at this Christmas time when peasants are going to be running low on their grain and their grain-based diet of bread, because that's all gone to the Lord for reselling, and they need food. They might, just go out into the woods and hunt. Let's take that away and make sure that the peasants don't view the forest as a good thing to have a gift provided for them by Father Winter.
There's a German children's story published in 1859 called King Winter by Gustav W. Seitz. In the story, a winter Yule figure inspired by old Teutonic traditions leaves his icy home to bring winter to the land and gifts to the good children. His wife, Queen Winter, spreads all over the earth a carpet downy of snow. This is obviously Mother Hulda, also known as Frau Halle, shaking out her bed and bringing snow into the country. As you can see, the Yule Father would be a nature, weather, or hunting deity like Thor, Freyr, Herne, or Uller. Another figure in the winter folklore of northern Germany is Belsnickel, said to be a companion of St. Nicholas, but instead of accompanying this Christian saint, he visits homes on his own. He's described as wearing furs and sometimes even a mask, delivering candy and treats to the good children and a switch or twig for the naughty children. We see again a figure connected to the woodlands, hunting, and living among nature. This figure has also appeared in the holiday traditions among the German populations of Pennsylvania in the 1800s. Another common misconception people have about Santa Claus is his colors. Traditionally, Santa doesn't wear red, but instead wears deep hues of green, blue, or brown, all colors that connect him with the forest, earth, and weather, while he doles out abundance and plenty in the depths of winter. It is the Anatolian Turkish Saint Nicholas who wears red and white, and these colors were later popularized in America by Coca-Cola to match their brand image. It's not some metaphor for reproductive organs or birth. It could possibly be that Santa's red coat maybe represents fire, since he does come down your chimney. Or the red could be representative of the rowan berry, which is a plant associated with Thor. Thor is also a god of the household, so it is possible that an argument could be made for the red coat, but the traditional Yule Father wears green or blue. There is a theory that red and white are representative of the Amanita muscaria mushroom, and I'll address that later in this video. Santa's helpers are the elves, and we know that in our mythology, Yngvi Freyr is also king of the elves and resides in Elfheim. The elves, of course, are ancestral spirits of nature, honored at the Blóðmánað, or blood moon, in mid-November for the Alfablót. It makes sense that many tribes would venerate this archetype during the Yule season, especially the Ingevones who attributed their lineage back to Yng. In the King Winter story, the king's helpers are the elements of winter, one of which is Jack Frost, and Jack is a kenning for spirit. In the poem 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, Santa is described as a jolly old elf, and the etymology of the word jolly comes from the Old Norse Jol, which means Yule, so Santa truly is the Yule elf. Perhaps the Yule elf was a family or communal house elf, like those attested to in English and Scottish folklore and the kobold in Germany. They come out when everyone's asleep, like in the Grimm's fairy tale The Elves and the Shoemaker. This might also be why no one ever sees Santa. They only know he's visited by the gifts he leaves behind in the eaten cookies. There might even be a very distant connection between house elves and German nutcrackers, which in the story by E.T.A. Hoffmann protect the house from mice and rats, who are known to carry germs and diseases. The Night Before Christmas poem even makes references to Hoffmann's story with lines like, "No creature was stirring, not even a mouse," and visions of sugar plum fairies. Elves are commonly seen as tiny creatures, and the famous poem also depicts Santa and his reindeer this way, with the line, "Miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer." In Scandinavia, house elves are called Tomte and Nissa. They bear a resemblance to Santa as well, with their white beards and red, green, or blue clothing. The Nissa in Norway live up in the attic of a home and come out every Yuletide. The family living in the home traditionally offers their Nissa a bowl of porridge, and this might also be connected to leaving milk and cookies out for Santa Claus. Now, regarding the Amanita muscaria, these vintage photos here show little gnomes and forest folk living in and dancing around the mushrooms, again showing the Yule association with animistic nature spirits. This type of mushroom can be found all over northern Europe and contains psychedelic, mind-altering properties. These were probably used by shamans and witches as a way to communicate with the spirit world. In Siberia and the Arctic regions, shamans would collect them and give them as gifts at midwinter. Reindeer also love this mushroom and will seek it out wherever they can, which might also be a reason they are associated with Santa. Amanita muscaria is found throughout the northern hemisphere, especially under birch trees. Perhaps there could be an ancient link here as to why presents are placed under the Yule tree. One final deity I want to discuss that might be associated with Yule is Tyr, or Tiwaz, the Sky Father and King of Asgard. Everyone knows Santa lives at the North Pole. Well, this is the Axis Mundi, which is symbolized by the Irminsul, the pillar that holds up the heavens and connects the sky and the earth, and is associated with the Sky Father Tyr. And Polaris, the North Pole star, is also connected with the Tyr rune from the Anglo-Saxon rune poem. 2 is a guiding star. Well does it keep faith with princes. It is ever on its course over the mists of night and never fails. And if you look at the Big Dipper constellation in all 4 seasons, it forms an important ethnic symbol of good luck and victory that is associated with the sky gods Tiwaz and Thonraz. And this makes sense. Who are more likely to be the leaders of the Wild Hunt? The great Teutonic Reich god of light and victory, resplendent with gift-giving, the boar fertility and nature magic god, the stag-like huntsman god of the woods, or the mysterious mercurial god that has no attested tribes and no known archaeology predating the migration age, and dresses up suspiciously like Isaac of York from the story of Ivanhoe, who comes from nowhere in a funny hat demarcating him as being of a certain tribe, and contributes nothing to the feast while his Norman elites and other swarthy allies terrorize the Saxons on the roads. Why would our god that helps us through winter and ushers in the new year be a fearful character who would snatch up your soul and take it to Helheim? Why would that same god be a ghost who scares all on the road, except for those who are strong in their faith or stay indoors? That sounds eerily like Passover from the book of Exodus in the Bible. Odin leading the Wild Hunt is Christian nonsense. There's a reason that it was known in the localities of southeast England that the Wild Hunt through the old woods was led by Freyr or Herne, and Herne might even be a winter visage of Tiwaz, the warrior sword god who turns hunter to sustain the people. I've also read that the name Freyr is connected to a derivation of the Proto-Indo-European word per, meaning to go forward, maybe as in the beginning or turning of the year, or progression of the hunt. In conclusion, the Yule Father may have varied between tribes. It was most likely Freyr, Thor, Herne, or Uller, or perhaps an amalgamation of these gods. Don't listen to these asatru thought leaders who just say that Santa is Odin, or that there are 12 nights of Yule Advent or something that take place on the winter solstice, when this is clearly contradicted by local folk traditions and historical evidence of a lunisolar calendar. Just because the Yule Father is a bearded magical figure does not automatically associate associate him with Odin. All of our gods are depicted with beards because it's an inherent symbol of masculinity. There's so much symbolism with Yuletide that indicates that this was a winter fertility festival in the Nordic New Year, with deities who are closely associated with nature. Even wreaths and kissing under holly and mistletoe are fertility symbols. I just don't see the wandering mystery god Odin fitting into this at all. Odin has over 170 different names, which clearly shows appropriation of characteristics and functions previously attributed to other figures. Yule is a celebration presided over by gods and goddesses of nature, hunting, fertility, light, and prosperity.